I went winter camping because I wanted quiet and because I trusted my preparation. I had done it before, though never alone and never this far from plowed roads. The forecast showed clear days and nights below freezing. I packed extra fuel, extra food, a four-season tent, snow stakes, a shovel, a down bag rated lower than the expected lows, and a small stove with a windscreen. I told myself that planning was the same as control. The trailhead was empty when I arrived. Snow covered the lot in a smooth layer broken only by my tires. The forest looked clean and sharp, every branch edged in white. Sound carried in a strange way, not louder, just cleaner, as if the air had been washed. I skied in for several hours, following a creek that had frozen into dull gray plates between banks of snow. The sun stayed low and pale. I picked a site above the creek where the trees thinned and the ground rose enough to avoid cold air pooling. I stamped out a platform, set the tent, built a low wall with cut blocks, and anchored everything until it felt locked in place. The first night passed without incident. The cold pressed in from every side, but the bag held. I woke once to frost forming on my eyelashes and once to the sound of snow settling from branches. I ate and drank and melted more snow. The routine felt steady. That steadiness made me careless. On the second afternoon, the sky changed. A thin haze crept in from the west, not enough to block the sun but enough to soften the shadows. The temperature dropped faster than expected. I noticed it while stamping snow for more blocks. My breath felt heavier. I told myself that winter does that. I finished the wall higher than planned, leaving only a narrow gap toward the trees. It seemed sensible at the time. The wind had picked up and I wanted shelter. I cooked early. I kept the stove just inside the vestibule, not inside the sleeping area, with the door cracked and the windscreen angled to block gusts. I had done this before in storms. I knew the warnings. I thought the airflow was enough. The pot took longer to boil. I blamed the cold. I sat hunched and watched the flame flicker blue and orange. The smell was faint, almost nothing, easy to ignore. That night the wind rose and fell in pulses. Snow hissed against the tent. The wall did its job. It also trapped what I could not see. I woke with a dull pressure behind my eyes and a strange sense that time was slipping. My watch said only an hour had passed, yet my thoughts felt slow. I adjusted the bag and tried to sleep. My mouth tasted sweet and metallic. I assumed dehydration and took a sip from the bottle. The pressure eased enough to let me drift again. Morning came gray and flat. I unzipped the vestibule and felt a rush of cold that cleared my head. The creek looked the same. The trees looked the same. The site looked neat and secure. I noticed my tracks from the day before had softened and filled. New marks cut across them near the wall. They were human boot prints, deep and uneven, crossing toward the trees and then back again. They were not mine. I stood still and counted my breaths. The prints were fresh enough to hold edges. I had not heard anyone.
No voices, no skis, no polis.
I circled the site slowly. The tracks ended where the snow drifted smooth again. The rational explanations lined up quickly. Another camper passing through at night. A hunter moving fast. Someone curious about a wall in the woods. The lack of other signs argued against it. No camp, no fire pit, no gear tracks. The feeling stayed anyway. The forest felt closer. The quiet felt watchful. I packed a day kit and skied a short loop to look for more signs. I found nothing. By mid-afternoon, my head hurt again. The pressure returned with a fog that made distances hard to judge. I fumbled with a buckle and dropped it into the snow twice. I told myself it was altitude and cold. I drank more and forced myself to eat. My hands shook. The wind built again, stronger this time, pushing spindrift over the wall. I added more blocks and sealed gaps until the vestibule opening faced only a narrow slit of sky. I cooked early again. The stove struggled. The flame sputtered. I angled the windscreen tighter. The headache eased as I sat there. The relief felt like proof that everything was fine. I stayed in the vestibule longer than necessary, waiting for the water to boil, watching the frost feather along the fabric. When I crawled into the bag, the warmth felt heavy and pleasant. Sleep came in fragments. I dreamed of moving through deep water, I woke with my heart racing and the pressure crushing my temples. The air felt thick. I unzipped the vestibule a hand's width and the cold poured in. I lay still and let it wash over me until the pain backed off. I did not think about why that worked. At some point I heard a sound that did not fit. It was not a footstep. It was not wind. It was a soft scrape, like fabric brushing snow. The tent wall bowed inward slightly and then settled. I froze and listened. Nothing followed. I stayed awake until dawn, counting breaths, watching the frost pattern change as light crept in. Morning brought clarity and fear. The boot prints were there again, closer, circling the wall. One print overlapped the edge of the platform where I had stamped it flat. The tread was different from mine. The spacing suggested a limp or heavy load. I searched for a line of approach and found none. The tracks appeared and vanished without a clear path. My head throbbed. My thoughts skittered. I decided to leave that day. Packing took longer than it should have. I forgot steps. I packed items twice and unpacked them again. I knocked over the stove and spilled melted snow onto the floor. The smell returned, stronger now that I noticed it. I opened everything wide and stepped back into the cold until my head cleared enough to work. When I shouldered the pack, my legs felt rubbery. I skied out along the creek. The light stayed flat. The wind pushed from behind, steady and cold. After an hour, the headache surged again. I slowed, then stopped. I felt dizzy, as if the ground tilted. I sat on my pack and breathed. The relief came when I pulled off my hat and let the cold bite. That pattern finally clicked. The stove, the wall, the nights. Carbon monoxide poisoning is quiet. It does not announce itself. It mimics fatigue and altitude and stress. I had created a trap and walked into it twice. The prints took on a new shape in my mind. I remembered stumbling out at night to vomit, a reflex my body used to save itself. I remembered brushing snow from the vestibule with clumsy hands. I remembered adjusting the wall in the dark. The marks matched my boots at odd angles, pressed deep where I had leaned. The limp was my own weakness. The circling was confusion. The fear did not vanish with the explanation. It sharpened. I was still cold and far from help. I forced myself to stand and move. I skied in short bursts, stopping often, keeping my hat off longer than comfort allowed. I ate sugar and drank water until my stomach protested. The world steadied inch by inch. The trailhead appeared like a promise kept. My car was half buried, familiar and solid. I sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine, letting the quiet settle. My hands tingled as warmth returned. I did not feel triumphant. I felt small and lucky. Later, after treatment and rest, the symptoms made sense in sequence. The pressure, the fog, the false calm, the confusion. The tracks were a mirror I did not recognize at the time. Winter had not hunted me. I had built a box and filled it with invisible poison. The forest had stayed what it was, indifferent and exact. I had survived because the cold kept breaking the seal, because my body forced me outside, because daylight came when it did. I still camp. I still plan. I leave wider gaps now. I cook in the open or not at all. I pay attention to relief as much as pain. When snow settles against fabric at night, I remember how easily fear grows when the air goes wrong, and how quickly reason returns when you let the cold in. I went camping because I had just finalized my divorce and needed somewhere quiet enough to hear my own thoughts again. I picked Allegheny because it was cheap, familiar, and far enough from cell service that nobody could reach me. I told myself that distance was a feature, not a risk. I had camped there before, years earlier, when life still felt balanced. The forest had always felt calm to me, predictable in a way cities never were. I left after work and drove north through fading daylight. The radio lost signal miles before I reached the forest roads. The sky was low and gray, the kind of autumn sky that presses down instead of opening up. Late September had already stripped the trees of their brightness. Leaves lay slick and heavy along the shoulders of the road. Every curve smelled like rot and rain. The trailhead was unmarked except for a rusted sign half covered in moss that explained dispersed camping was allowed beyond that point. No ranger station, no payment box, no map, just a gravel pull-off and a narrow path disappearing into trees. I checked my watch. It read 6:41 p.m. Sunset was close. I locked the car, adjusted my pack, and started walking. The trail climbed right away. The ground was soft from recent rain, each step sinking slightly. The forest felt closed in, thick with hemlock and beech. There was no wind. Leaves did not move unless I brushed them. Every sound came from my own body, my breathing, my boots, the shift of straps against my shoulders. I planned to hike in about a mile and camp near water. I remembered a creek that ran parallel to the ridge. I found it just as the light started to thin. The water was moving, but it did not sound right. A creek that size should chatter and echo. This one slid along like something was pressing down on it. The surface rippled without noise. It reminded me of holding a finger against a spinning fan. I set my tent on a small flat patch above the bank. The ground was cold through my knees as I worked. The air smelled like wet leaves and iron. My hands shook from the chill and from being alone longer than I had expected. I ate a simple meal without cooking, sitting on a log, listening for animals. I heard none. No insects, no frogs. The forest settled into a steady quiet that felt heavier than silence. Darkness came fast. I zipped myself into the tent and turned off my headlamp. I lay on my back staring at nylon inches from my face, listening to my heartbeat slow. My thoughts wandered to paperwork and empty rooms and the sound of a door closing for the last time. I remember thinking that the forest felt too attentive, like it was listening back. Around 11 p.m., I heard the first whistle. One clean note, long and steady, came from uphill maybe 50 yards away. It cut through the dark with precision. It was not a bird. It was not wind. It had shape and control. My first thought was another camper. That idea made me relax. I assumed someone had wandered too close to my sight. Without thinking, I whistled back. I matched the pitch as best I could. Came out weaker than I wanted, but close enough. The return whistle arrived almost immediately. Same pitch, same length, cleaner than mine. It sounded practiced. I felt embarrassed for responding. I told myself it was harmless. People signal like that sometimes in the woods. I lay still, listening. A few seconds passed. Then another whistle came, this time from my left. The distance felt the same. The tone was identical. My chest tightened. I sat up and turned on my headlamp. The beam cut through the trees and stopped short. The forest swallowed light. The creek below reflected nothing. Another whistle came from uphill again. Same note, same duration. The spacing between them felt measured, not random. The sound did not drift. It landed exactly where it was aimed. I stayed still. I told myself there were probably two people moving around. The terrain was uneven. Sound traveled strangely at night. That explanation should have been enough. It was not. The whistles continued. They never overlapped. Each one came after the previous ended, with a pause long enough to feel deliberate. The direction shifted each time. Uphill, left, behind me, closer to the creek. Always the same distance, always the same note. I realized then that no one had ever taught me how to whistle like that. I could not hold a note steady for that long. I could not keep it from wavering. Whoever was doing it had practiced. The thought of someone practicing in the dark, near my tent, made my skin crawl. I stayed inside and waited. I did not call out. I did not move. My headlamp stayed on, aimed at the tent wall. The light made the fabric glow and turned everything outside into shadow. The whistles stopped after about 10 minutes. The quiet that followed felt sharper than before. I listened for footsteps. I heard none. I listened for the creek. Still sounded wrong. I did not sleep. Every sound felt amplified. The crack of a branch somewhere distant made my heart jump. My muscles stayed tense until they ached. Sometime before dawn, I heard movement near the creek. Slow steps, heavy. Someone walking carefully, placing each foot. The sound stayed low, as if the person was crouching. It moved parallel to my camp, never crossing the water. I stayed frozen. My breath felt loud in my ears. The steps paused, then continued. They faded into the trees downstream. When the sky began to lighten, I did not wait. I shoved my keys into my pocket and stepped out of the tent without packing anything. My flashlight was still on. I did not turn it off. I walked uphill toward the trail with my shoulders hunched and my eyes scanning everything. The forest looked normal in daylight. Damp leaves, gray trunks, no sign of anyone else. My car sat where I left it. I drove away with my hands shaking on the wheel. I told myself it was nerves, stress, divorce, a stranger in the woods who meant nothing. I did not camp again for years. 2 weeks later, I read a short notice online about an arrest in the Allegheny National Forest. A man had been taken into custody for illegal hunting and harassment of campers. The article was brief. It mentioned that he had been using a whistle to locate people and scare them away from certain areas. He had done it for years. He knew the trails. He moved fast. He avoided detection by circling camps and never approaching directly. I learned later that the creek near my site had been partially dammed upstream by debris and old beaver work. The slowed water muffled sound. The hills created a natural bowl that carried noise in strange ways. A single person could sound like many if they knew where to stand. The man had been mapping campsites for months, marking patterns of use. He preferred solo campers. He never spoke to them. He liked control. He liked knowing where people were without being seen. I never went back to retrieve my gear. Rangers cleared it out eventually. They found footprints near the creek and a worn path along the ridge that matched the movement I had heard. I still think about that night sometimes, about how easily I answered back, about how quickly a familiar place became something else. The forest did not change. Person did. That was enough. I went camping to test a new pack and clear my head after months of desk work. The site sat off a decommissioned logging road in a national forest I had visited before. The map showed a creek, a flat bench above it, and a spur trail that ended at a clearing. I parked before dusk, locked the car, and walked in with a steady pace. The air smelled of wet pine and cold dirt. The ground held last week's rain. Everything felt ordinary. I set my tent on packed soil between two firs. I chose the spot because it showed old fire scars and fewer rocks. I hung my food bag on a branch high enough to keep rodents away. I cooked early, cleaned with care, and scattered rinse water far from camp. The forest settled into quiet. I heard no voices, no engines, no animals large enough to worry me. I slept light, waking at small sounds, but nothing felt wrong. In the morning, I found boot prints near the creek. They crossed the mud and climbed toward my site. They stopped at the edge of my tent footprint and turned away. The tread looked worn, the heel rounded, the pattern old. I told myself a hiker had passed. The road was not far. I packed light for a day hike upstream and left camp standing. When I returned before sunset, my food bag hung lower than I left it. The knot looked different. The rope showed fresh fuzz where it had rubbed bark. I checked the bag. Nothing was missing. I told myself wind could do that, though there was no wind. I tightened the knot and moved my knife into the tent vestibule. That night I slept worse. Leaves scraped now and then. A branch snapped once. I waited for a deer to pass. The sound never traveled away. It stayed close and then stopped. I lay still until dawn. The second morning the creek level had dropped. I followed it farther than planned, stepping over slick stones, careful with footing. I found a place where the bank had been cut with a shovel. The soil showed straight edges and a mound covered with needles. A tarp corner stuck out. I did not touch it. I turned back. At camp, my stove lay on its side. My spoon sat in the dirt. The tent zipper was open. Inside, nothing was taken. The sleeping bag had been pressed flat, like someone had leaned on it. The ground showed knee marks. I stood there longer than needed, breathing slow, counting sounds. The forest felt tight. The quiet pressed on my ears. I considered leaving. Pride kept me another night. I told myself there were explanations. Curious hiker. A local. I moved my food bag closer to camp and hung it higher. I packed my car key into my pocket and kept my headlamp on a cord around my neck. I did not hike. I stayed near camp, cleaning, sorting, pretending calm. Near dusk I smelled smoke. Came and went with the air. I followed it downwind and found a cold fire pit hidden by brush. The stones were blackened. The ash held cigarette filters mashed flat. I do not smoke. I kicked dirt over the pit and returned. That night I did not sleep. Around midnight the forest noise thinned. A shape blocked the stars for a moment between my tent and the creek. It moved slow, careful with weight. I held my breath. The zipper did not move. The shape stayed for a long minute and then eased away. Later, something touched the food rope. The line creaked. I flicked my headlamp once. The beam cut empty trunks and shadows. The rope swung. By morning, my decision was made. I packed fast. I kept scanning the trees. I saw no one. The prints returned near the creek, deeper now, closer to my tent. They matched the worn tread from before. I followed them uphill for a short distance and stopped. They led to a thicket where the ground dipped. Inside sat a low shelter made from branches and a sheet of green plastic. Cans lined one side, washed and stacked. A pile of clothes lay folded. A rifle case rested under leaves. I backed away without noise. My heart felt loud. I took the spur trail at a jog and reached the road. My car stood untouched. As I drove out, I passed a truck hidden behind brush farther down the road. It had no plates. The cab held food wrappers and a sleeping pad. I reported everything at the ranger station in town. I showed photos of the prints, the shelter, the truck. The ranger took notes and made calls. A week later, I got a message asking for more details. The Forest Service and local deputies had found a man living there. He had been avoiding warrants and using the forest as cover. He watched camps for supplies and waited for people to sleep before checking gear. He never took much. He stayed close. I stopped camping alone after that. I still hike. I still love quiet places. I no longer ignore signs that do not fit. The forest did nothing wrong. Person did. I chose the site because the reservation system glitched and marked it as available even though it was Memorial Day weekend. The rest of the campground had been booked for weeks. Every other site showed red blocks across the calendar. This one stayed green no matter how many times I refreshed. I assumed a cancellation had slipped through late at night and the system lagged. I told myself that technology fails all the time and that luck had finally landed on me. That should have been my first clue. The road in was packed. Trucks with roof boxes and kayaks crept along the entrance. Families waited at the booth, and every overflow pullout held a car with a cooler on the ground beside it. Rangers waved people away and pointed toward day-use areas. I rolled past all of that and followed the narrow loop toward the back, where the numbered posts grew older and the gravel thinned. My sight sat beyond a bend near the tree line, tucked against a stand of pine and fir. It looked untouched from a distance. No tent, no chairs, no vehicle, just a flat pad of dirt and needles bordered by low stones. Up close, the signs showed themselves. The grass beyond the pad lay pressed down in a broad oval, not crushed flat the way tents do, but bent and smoothed as if someone had stood there for long stretches. A half-burned log rested in the fire ring, charred only on one side, with ash that had been stirred and then leveled. There was no trash, no wrappers, no bottles. The metal grate was warm to the touch, as if it had been used not long before. I stood there and listened. The campground carried the usual sounds of a holiday weekend. Distant laughter, a generator humming far off, doors slamming, kids running. Nothing came from the trees behind the site. I told myself someone had just left. Early checkout, an early start to beat traffic. People leave firewood behind all the time. I unloaded my car and set my tent at the edge of the pad, leaving the center open. I pitched quickly, conscious of the light and the sense of being late. The reservation confirmation sat printed on my dashboard. The number matched the post. I walked to the spigot and filled my bottles, nodding to strangers who did not look at me. When I came back, the flattened grass caught my eye again. It formed a line that led toward the treeline, then stopped. The afternoon passed without incident. I hiked a short loop, kept my pack light, and returned to cook before dark. The woods felt normal. Birds hopped in the underbrush. A squirrel scolded me from a stump. The air held that dry resin smell that settles into clothes. When the sun dropped, the temperature followed, and the campground grew quieter. Families retreated to tents. Doors zipped. The generator cut out. I cleaned my pan, locked food in the trunk, and sat by the fire until the flames fell low. The half-burned log hissed when I nudged it. I wondered again who had used it last. Night arrived fully. The sky between branches turned black. The trees closed in, their outlines blending into one mass. I crawled into my tent and lay on my back, listening to the fabric tick as it cooled. At first, all I heard was wind moving high above, not enough to sway branches, just enough to make needles brush. Somewhere a dog barked once, then stopped. The sounds felt ordinary, the kind that fade as sleep takes over. Then I noticed movement from the tree-line. Not footsteps, no crunch of leaves, no steady approach. It sounded like weight shifting. Pause, then another shift. The kind of movement people make when standing still too long and adjusting their stance. It came from the same direction each time, just beyond where the light from my headlamp would reach. I held still and listened. The sounds stopped. Minutes passed. I relaxed enough to roll onto my side. The movement started again. Closer this time. Still no steps. No approach. Just the quiet scrape of fabric against bark or skin against cloth. Then a faint exhale. I waited for an animal to announce itself with noise or a rush. Nothing like that came. The pattern stayed human. Slow adjustments, careful, controlled. I lay there and counted breaths. I told myself that campgrounds carry sound in strange ways and that someone could be at a nearby site, standing, stretching, unable to sleep. I turned on my headlamp and aimed it through the mesh. The beam cut a cone into the darkness and caught nothing but trunks and shadow. When I switched it off, the sounds resumed almost at once. The distance felt wrong, too close for comfort. I sat up. The fabric rustled, loud in the quiet. The movement stopped. My heart hammered and then settled. I stayed upright until my legs cramped. I made the decision to acknowledge it because the uncertainty pressed harder than fear. I cleared my throat and directed my voice toward the trees. I asked if someone was there. The answer came immediately, from so near that it felt inside the space of my tent. It was not shouted. It was calm. It stated ownership. Carried the certainty of a claim. The words landed with weight, and the silence that followed felt deliberate. I did not respond. I did not move. I sat with my hands braced on the ground and waited for something else to happen. Nothing did. The night resumed its low noises. The shifting stopped. The air felt thick, as if sound had been dampened. I lay back down and stared at the ceiling until my neck ached. Sleep did not come. Every small sound snapped my attention awake. I replayed the voice, the timing, the closeness. I pictured someone standing at the edge of my tent, careful not to touch the fabric. Hours passed in fragments. The cold deepened. Condensation formed and dripped. At one point, I heard the shifting again, farther off now, then moving along the tree-line. It never crossed the open space. It never approached the car. Kept its distance, as if respecting a boundary. That made it worse. Dawn arrived without drama. The sky lightened to gray, then pale blue. Birds resumed their calls. I unzipped the tent and stepped out stiff and sore. The campsite looked unchanged. No footprints marked the dirt. The pine needles lay undisturbed. I walked the edge of the pad and scanned the ground. Nothing obvious. I moved toward my car and froze. A tarp lay folded beside the rear tire. Not crumpled, not stuffed. Folded into a neat rectangle, edges aligned. It was a heavy-duty type, green and thick, with grommets that showed wear. It did not belong to me. I did not carry a tarp on short trips. I touched it. The surface felt warm. The sun had just cleared the trees, and the spot sat in shade. The warmth came from insulation and recent use, not sunlight. I stepped back and looked around again. The flattened grass made sense now. The half-burned log fit. The lack of trash pointed to someone who knew how to stay hidden. I imagined a long-term presence, someone who treated the site as theirs because the system had allowed it to be empty for a stretch. Memorial Day weekend had disrupted that routine. The glitch had put us in the same place at the same time. I loaded my gear without packing carefully. The tarp stayed where it was. I did not want to touch it again. I drove out as soon as the road opened and pulled over near the ranger station. The building sat quiet, blinds drawn, flags slack. A bulletin board stood near the door with laminated notices. One caught my eye. It described an ongoing issue with unauthorized camping in the back loop, someone who avoided contact and moved sites when approached. The note mentioned no violence, only persistence. It advised reporting sightings and not confronting anyone. I wrote down the site number and left the paper under a rock by the door. I drove home on back roads and stopped once to wash my hands. The smell of pine clung to me for days. Later, I looked up the reservation system issue. A maintenance notice explained a sync failure that had briefly shown blocked sites as open. The fix went live the morning after I left. The site returned to red. I never use reservation systems anymore. I call ahead. I ask questions. I choose places with neighbors and light. When I camp, I pay attention to the ground before I unload. I notice what is missing as much as what is there. The woods still feel like the woods, but the idea of a claimed space without markers has changed how I see them. The explanation is simple. A person had been there long enough to believe the spot belonged to them. The warmth of the tarp came from a body folded into it before dawn, waiting for me to leave. My name is Mark. I was 16 in November of 1993 when my father insisted on one last family camping trip before my older brother shipped out for the Navy. He said it would clear our heads. He said it would give us something solid to remember. It was late in the season, colder than it should have been, and the rain had already settled into the valleys by then. The kind of rain that never falls hard enough to make noise, only steady enough to erase color from the world. We drove west from our town before dawn, following highways that narrowed into county roads, then gravel. Pines crowded closer with every mile. The radio lost its signal early. My father drove with both hands tight on the wheel. My brother sat in the passenger seat, shoulders hunched, jaw clenched. He had come back from basic training different. He slept badly. He startled easily. He kept his boots lined up with exact care no matter where we stayed. My mother noticed. I noticed. None of us talked about it. The campground sat beside a river swollen with fall runoff. A wooden sign leaned at the entrance, its lettering faded and swollen from years of moisture. Only one truck sat near the far loop when we pulled in, an older model with a camper shell. No plates on the front. It looked abandoned even then. The air smelled of wet needles and rotting leaves. Everything felt heavy. Sound did not carry. Even the river seemed muted. We chose a site close to the water but not too close, one my father remembered from years earlier. He said the trees there broke the wind. The ground sloped gently and looked firm enough. We unloaded in silence, each of us focused on our own tasks. My father pitched the tent with quick, practiced motions. My mother laid out gear under the tarp. My brother wandered the perimeter of the site, scanning the tree line in a way that did not look like casual curiosity. I pretended not to see it. The rain started before we finished setting up. Not a storm, just a constant presence. It soaked into our jackets and crept down the backs of our necks. The ground darkened fast. Mud formed where we walked back and forth. The forest closed in, the trees swallowing what little light filtered through the clouds. I was the one who noticed the tracks first. They were behind the tent, near the edge of the clearing where the trees thickened. The impressions were deep, wide, longer than my foot by several inches. The toes were wrong, spread too evenly. No claw marks. The heel sank heavier than the front. They did not look like bear tracks. I had grown up hiking these woods. I had seen bear sign before. This was different. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at the mud as rain softened the edges. The prints angled away from the tent, then curved back, as if whoever made them had changed direction mid-step. There was no drag, no stumble, just careful placement. I looked toward my brother. He was tightening a guy line with more force than needed, shoulders stiff. I did not say anything. He had been jumpy since coming home. He woke up sweating some nights. He snapped awake at small noises. I told myself it was better if he did not know. I told myself there had to be a normal explanation. Hunters passed through sometimes. Campgrounds drew all kinds. By late afternoon, the other truck was gone. We watched it drive out from under the tarp, its tires leaving fresh ruts in the gravel. After that, the campground was empty. No other tents, no voices, no distant engines. Just rain and the river and the steady drip from branches overhead. Darkness came early. The clouds swallowed what little daylight remained. My father built a fire with damp wood, coaxing it to life with patience. The smoke hung low, stinging our eyes. We ate quickly, standing close to the heat. My brother kept glancing past the firelight into the trees. My mother wrapped her jacket tighter. The rain never stopped. We crawled into the tent early. The ground was cold through our pads. The fabric sagged slightly from the weight of the water. The forest pressed close, every sound amplified by the quiet. I lay awake listening to the rain hit nylon, the river sliding past, the occasional snap of a branch under its own weight. At some point after midnight, something walked around our tent. The first sound was the pressure of weight on wet ground. Slow, deliberate. One step, then another. Not circling wide like an animal wary of fire or scent. Close enough that I could sense the shift of mass through the earth. No sniffing, no huffing, no rustle of fur. Just the sound of feet placed with care. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I lay frozen, listening. The steps moved from one side of the tent to the other, then paused. The rain softened everything else, but those sounds cut through. Whoever it was stopped near the back of the tent, where the tracks had been earlier. The fabric pressed inward slightly, not enough to touch us, but enough to show intent. I held my breath. I could hear my brother breathing, fast at first, then controlled. He was awake. I knew it without looking. The steps resumed, moving toward the front of the tent, then away, then back again. No pattern I could follow, just the sense of someone deciding where to stand. I thought about waking my father. I thought about making noise. I did nothing. The weight shifted once more, then retreated into the trees. The sounds faded, swallowed by rain. Sleep did not come easily after that. When it did, it was shallow and broken. Morning arrived gray and cold. The rain eased into a mist. The fire pit was a soggy mess. My father emerged first, stretching stiffly. My brother followed, face pale, eyes ring dark. He did not look at me. My mother moved slowly, her hands shaking as she poured coffee. I went to the back of the tent as soon as I could. The tracks were there, clearer now in the softened mud. The impressions led away from the tent in a straight line toward the river. No wandering, no hesitation. They ended at the water's edge and stopped. No drag marks, no prints coming back. The river had risen overnight, its surface brown and fast. Whatever made those tracks had stepped into the water and disappeared. I walked along the bank for a while, scanning for signs. There were none. The rain had erased everything else. The forest looked the same as it had the day before. Quiet, empty. We packed up without discussion. My father moved with urgency, his earlier calm replaced by something tighter. My brother kept watch while we worked, his gaze never settling. We loaded the car and drove out under the same gray sky. No other vehicles passed us. The sign at the entrance leaned a little more, as if the ground beneath it had softened overnight. We did not talk about what happened. Not then. Not on the drive home. Not in the years that followed. My brother shipped out a week later. He sent letters from ports around the world. He built a life that looked steady from the outside. I built mine too. I thought about that night often. The tracks, the steps, the way they ended at the river. I told myself stories to make it fit. A hunter checking camps, a hiker lost in the rain, an animal walking oddly due to injury. None of it sat right. The explanation came years later, in pieces. I was in my 30s, cleaning out my parents' house after my father died. The basement held boxes no one had opened in decades. Old newspapers, camping gear, maps. I found a folded clipping tucked inside a guidebook for the very campground we had visited. The date was October 1993, a month before our trip. The article described a man arrested downstream from that campground after weeks of reports from campers. He had been living in the forest, following occupied sites at night, watching families from the trees. He wore modified waders to move through the river, rubber boots extended and weighted to distort prints. He entered the water to erase his trail. He had no weapon when caught. No charges stuck beyond trespassing and harassment. He had a history of similar behavior in other parks. The article mentioned fear, unease, no physical harm. My father must have read it before we went. He must have thought it was overblown. He never mentioned it. I looked up court records later. The man was released months before our trip. The river access points matched. The timing fit. The tracks fit. I still have not told my brother. He built a life that holds together because some things stayed unspoken. I understand now what I heard that night. It was a person, careful, patient, close enough to choose his steps. He walked into the river because he knew how to vanish. We went out there because Evan had just bought a truck and wanted to prove it could handle more than pavement. That was the version we told ourselves. The real reason was simpler. We were 22, restless and tired of apartments, jobs that paid just enough to keep us stuck, and weekends that all felt the same. Sleeping on the ground, far from lights, sounded like proof that we were doing something real with our time. It was August 2015, late summer, when northern Utah dries out and the heat lingers after sunset. We left Logan in the afternoon, the truck loaded with cheap camping gear, coolers, and enough food for one night. The pavement thinned into cracked asphalt, then into dirt. Cell service dropped in and out. The GPS showed a thin line that barely looked like a road, but Evan followed it anyway. Dust trailed behind us in a long plume that hung in the air. The land flattened out into BLM ground with no clear boundaries. No signs, no fences, just scrub brush, rocks, and distant low hills. We drove until the road started to fade into nothing and stopped because it felt far enough. There were no established sites, no fire rings, no tire tracks that looked recent. That should have mattered more to us than it did. The silence was the first thing I noticed when the engine shut off. Not quiet exactly, but empty. No wind in trees because there were no trees. No insects loud enough to stand out. Just the low hum of nothing, broken only when one of us moved and boots scraped rock. We set up camp in a loose circle near the truck. 2 tents, a folding table, a few camp chairs. The ground was hard and uneven, pale dirt mixed with stones. We built a fire ring by stacking rocks we found nearby. It took longer than it should have because none of the rocks were right. Too smooth, too round, or too small. We ended up with a rough circle that looked passable once the fire was lit. As the sun went down, the heat bled out of the ground fast. The sky opened up in a way it never does near town. Stars appeared by the hundreds, then thousands. The Milky Way cut across the sky like a pale scar. It was beautiful in a way that made me feel exposed. There was nothing to block the view in any direction. No trees, no cliffs, no rise in the land. Just us, the truck, and open ground. We ate, drank, and sat close to the fire as the temperature dropped. The firewood snapped and popped, the sound sharp in the open space. Every spark felt louder than it should have. At some point, without thinking much about it, I walked a few steps away from the fire to take a leak and felt how quickly the darkness swallowed me. The firelight barely reached 10 feet. Past that, the ground disappeared. It was later, close to midnight, when Jake noticed the second fire ring. He didn't say anything at first. He stood up and walked a short distance away from our circle, his silhouette cutting across the firelight. I followed his line of sight and saw it too. A ring of stones about 30 yards out, almost identical in size and shape to the one we had built. What struck me wasn't just that it was there. It was how clean it looked. The rocks were pale, unmarked by soot. No ash inside. No burned wood. The ground around it was smooth, the dirt undisturbed. No footprints leading to it from any direction. The distance bothered me. It was far enough away to be separate, but close enough to feel intentional. Whoever had placed those rocks had chosen a spot that faced ours directly. The opening in the ring lined up with ours. I remember thinking that if someone sat there, they would have had a clear view of us. We didn't find any trash, no cans, no fire scars nearby. The land around us looked untouched. Evan brushed it off with a joke and tossed another log onto our fire. The flames jumped and threw light across the second ring, making it stand out even more against the dark. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter. People camp on BLM land all the time. Someone could have been there days or weeks earlier. But the rocks were clean in a way that didn't match that idea. Desert fires leave marks. Even one night would have blackened the stone. The night deepened. The fire burned lower. One by one, we settled into our chairs, then onto the ground. The cold crept in through my jacket and jeans. I checked my phone for the time because sleep wasn't coming easily. It read 2:17 a.m. That was when I heard the sound of boots on gravel. At first, I thought it was one of my friends shifting around. The sound was steady, rhythmic. Crunch, pause, crunch. Heavy steps like someone wearing thick soles. The noise came from just beyond the firelight, close enough that I could tell it was circling us. The steps stayed at the edge of the light, never closer, never farther, just out of view. I held my breath and listened. Each step was deliberate, spaced evenly, not rushed. Whoever it was knew exactly where the light ended. I scanned the darkness, eyes straining, but the night swallowed everything. The fire was down to low flames and red coals. Shadows stretched and twisted across the ground. The steps continued, slow and steady, completing a full circle around us. My chest tightened. I wanted to move closer to the fire, but the sound made me freeze. The idea of standing up felt wrong, like it would draw attention. I checked my phone again without turning on the light. The screen dimmed as low as it would go. The time hadn't changed much. The steps stopped for a moment, then resumed. This time, they shifted direction, moving toward the second fire ring. I could hear the gravel crunch underfoot as the sound faded slightly, then stopped again. The night went still, too still. No steps, no movement. The fire hissed softly as a log settled. My ears rang with the effort of listening. Eventually, exhaustion won. I don't remember falling asleep. I remember lying there, staring up at the stars, replaying the sound in my head until my thoughts blurred. When I woke up, the sky was pale with early light. The cold had settled deep into my bones. The fire was nothing but gray ash and a few dull embers. I sat up slowly, my body stiff, and looked around. The second fire ring was different. Dark ash filled the center, still piled thick. A faint curl of smoke rose when a breeze passed over it. I walked closer, heart pounding, and felt the heat on my face. The ash was warm. Someone had used it recently, very recently. Our fire had burned down hours before. There was no way the ash could still be warm unless it had been lit after ours died. I crouched and looked closer. The wood inside was burned clean, reduced to fine ash. The rocks were blackened now, cracked from heat. Around the ring, the ground showed faint scuffs. Boot prints pressed into the dirt, fresh enough that the edges were sharp. They circled the ring once, then led away toward the road, fading as the ground hardened. I stood there for a long time trying to make sense of it. No one had approached us openly. No voices, no light, just someone moving in the dark, watching, waiting for our fire to go out before lighting their own. When the others woke up, they saw it too. No one laughed this time. We packed up faster than planned. Tents collapsed, gear shoved into the truck without care. No one suggested staying longer. On the drive home, the truck hummed over the dirt road, dust rising behind us again. The sun was fully up now, the land looking harmless in daylight. The second fire ring disappeared behind us, swallowed by distance. None of us talked about what happened. There was nothing to argue over. The evidence was clear. Someone had been there with us, close enough to hear us breathe, close enough to circle us in the dark without making a mistake. Months later, after curiosity replaced fear, I looked into reports from that area. BLM land near Logan had seen its share of problems. People living out there off the grid, transients moving between camps, a few incidents of theft from remote campsites. One report mentioned a man who would wait until other campers were asleep, then move through their sites, watching, sometimes lighting fires nearby to see who reacted. Fit too well to ignore. A person who knew the land, comfortable in the dark, wearing boots heavy enough to make themselves known without revealing their position. Someone who wanted to be noticed but not confronted. We were lucky. We didn't lose anything. No one touched us or our gear. The person kept their distance and left before daylight fully arrived. I still think about how quiet we were that night, how exposed we were under that open sky. The desert didn't protect us. It hid everything else instead. I haven't camped on unmarked land since. When I build a fire now, I look for old rings. If I see one that's clean, I leave. I don't need proof anymore. I know how little it takes for someone to stand just outside the light and wait.